Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Worn Shoes podcast where I interview my friend Mary Ellen and we talk about her life in France, coming to the States, and what she's doing now with education. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. It was a gorgeous day when we did the interview, so we actually sat outside on the porch in Atlanta, Georgia, so you may hear some birds, conversations, or trucks. I've tried to filter stuff out the best I can, but I apologize for that. Also, my wife Michelle was there with us, and she asks a couple questions through the episode, so hope you guys enjoy. Mary Ellen, welcome to Worn Shoes podcast. Thanks for being on. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah. To start off, would you mind telling me what does the word home mean to you, and where are some of the places or place that you would consider to be home?
Home has to be any place that I've lived for more than a year or two, I have to say. Mm-hmm. I've lived a lot of places for less than a year or two, and I definitely would not consider those places home.
Yeah.
I was born in Marseille, France, so that tends to be my childhood home if I think about it. And then I also lived in Toulouse, France for an extensive period of time, and I would say that would also be another home.
Yeah.
And then I went to college on Lookout Mountain, and that's also home. So we're working on Roswell being home too, but
yeah.
It's a process.
Yeah. Yeah, so you were born in Marseille, France.
Yes.
How did you end up over there, and what was that like growing up as a kid in Marseille? Yeah,
so my parents are missionaries. My dad's a church planner, and so we've lived there as long as I can remember personally.
Mm-hmm.
My parents have been on the field for 35 years.
Wow.
This year. So they consider themselves to be more French than American at this point, which I think is really funny considering their accents.
Yeah.
However, I would personally consider Marseille to be home, and I don't think I would think that they are French personally, but
You said your parents, you wouldn't consider them to be French?
Right, my parents have lived in France for 35 years, so They are also TCKs on their end, third culture kids, so they have lived in France longer than they have anywhere else, so they're calling themselves French, and then I'm over here trying to call myself French, and it's just really humorous.
Yeah, and so for those that may not be familiar, you mentioned TCK.
Yes.
What is that? What does that mean to you?
So TCKs are third culture kids. So it's when a family has parents that come from a culture different than where the child is growing up. So, for example, my parents are Americans, in all technicality of the term, and then we grew up in France, me and my siblings. We grew up in France, so we had a mixture of the two cultures in our home. So that makes a third culture, which is different than what anybody else would experience. Yeah,
and so within this third culture that you grew up experiencing, can you tell me a little bit about the French culture and how you experienced that? And then perhaps how that was blended in your home culture. Right.
So the French consider themselves to be a communitarian culture, where they base it more on community. So the whole aspect of growing up, every child is part of the community, and basically any adult can speak into their lives as a parent, basically. So, and then the Americans, I think, would consider themselves more individualistic. The family unit being its own unit all by itself.
Yeah.
The parents that are the parents of those children are the only ones that can speak as parents, type of thing. So, at least that's what I've experienced from my side of the world. But, so I grew up with that family around me of different missionaries that were all speaking into my life, and then also like church members that were all speaking into my life, and even like my friends from school, their parents were speaking into my life without any consultation of anybody else. So that community was very tight-knit and definitely formed me to become who I am. So
yeah, and so yeah, no, that's interesting. You talked about all these people speaking into your life. Mm-hmm. How did you experience people speaking into your life generally? What were some of the positives of that, and maybe some of the negatives of that? And yeah, tell me a little bit more about that. Did you say communitarian?
Yeah,
communitarian life.
Yeah, so it really varies from like how to interact with people, how to approach situations of friendships, or even how to approach school as a concept. Like my childhood was always, you dress your best for school, you bring your best face to school, like you give it your best, and then you come home and you can relax. But everything about it was, these parents are all talking to you about bringing your best foot forward. Yeah. And then, so I approached that coming from like this third view where, for lack of a better word, like they were helping me, they were guiding me along the way. So you kind of grown up, you really felt like you had this force, like this community of people that were helping you and guiding you and pushing you forward. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. And so you talked about going into school and putting forward your best foot every day. What school did you go to, and what was that kind of like? Yeah, so I grew up going to French public schools. The public school system is very rigorous and doesn't leave much room for error at all, or individualism, really. Yeah. So the French like to say that they're a molding culture. So interesting. When you go through the system, they help you become, the best citizen possible type of thing, which is really humorous considering the French socialist perspective, but we're not going to go into that. That's a conversation for a different day. Okay. But so my approach to school was fight the mold. Fight the mold. That's how I saw it. I was like, I did not like having to fit into the mold, and because I didn't have the same equipment that all the other French kids had in the perspective of like culture or linguistic abilities. A lot of it was fed from parents, and my parents were not French, and so they didn't have the tools to give me, the French mentality, the French philosophy of life. Like they didn't have that. So they gave me the Christian philosophy instead, and they gave me the American approach a lot of the time, and they just wanted me to be me. Yeah. Which I really appreciate them for. So. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Talking about this molding culture in the French. Would you describe the French as having a lot of pride in their cultural identity? And could you talk maybe a little bit about that? Absolutely. The French are very prideful of their culture and their identity. So much so that, when you get to high school and you're in your 11th grade or 12th grade, they put you in philosophy classes, and they say that, no good French person can go through life without, the basics of philosophy, and they're just very prideful of that sense of history and culture that's accumulated throughout the years, and they're the best culture in the world if you ask them. So, but I think the Americans listening would have something else to say about that. Maybe. But So from your kind of third blended culture between your American parents and growing up in France, what would you say? What does it mean to be French, I guess? It's a loaded question. Or how would the French describe that, and then to you, what does that mean to you, I guess? What does it mean to be French? I think that pride comes back in, the sense of we're very proud of the culture and very proud of the historical significance of the country and the world. I think that comes into play a lot. I think there's also a sense of, not to get a little bit more controversial, but soccer teams are really important to the French. A lot of things like that, things that really get people riled up. Even in America, you have that sense of like football culture. Like, it's very similar in France with soccer.
Interesting.
They might get a little bit more violent than the Americans. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But yeah, the sense of pride is really important. And then I think like it goes into like food. It goes into how you live your day-to-day life, how you move about the world. Like all of those like are ingrained in the French culture, like such as the fact that I'm currently drinking tea.
Right.
Is a very French thing.
To
drink tisane, like the herbal tea, and then like how do you get about? You walk places, like you try to be environmentally conscious. Like these are very French aspects of life. And the places like the French, their philosophy, I'm going to go back to it, is very much like it's very, for lack of a better word, slightly depressing. It's you are just a piece of the world. You are not the world. And so going back to like how my parents raised me, it was very much like, you can be a piece of the world, but also you're a Christian, and so you have to believe that you're taking care of the world as well, and that you're furthering the kingdom of God. So
yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, you mentioned a little bit earlier about taking pride in French food, and some people may be familiar and others may not. But could you tell me a little bit about the food that you ate growing up, and what were some of your favorite meals or desserts?
The French are very proud of their food for sure. Yes, that is definitely a thing. But what I learned was that the French on a day-to-day basis are actually very simplistic in the way that they approach life. And so if you think about it, like French people usually drink a cup of coffee in the morning with their cigarette, usually, to be completely honest. And they won't have much of a breakfast on their day-to-day life. I know that Americans tend to associate pastries and bread with the French culture. Most people skip breakfast in France. Sometimes they'll have, a tartine is what we called it. It was like a piece of baguette with some jam on it. Very simplistic. But they had this idea that, like, you ate breakfast like a pauper, you had lunch like a prince, and then you had dinner like a king, So, a little upside down world. But lunch would be usually very, very simple, like a soup. And then you get to dinner, and then you have maybe a little bit more, but it wouldn't be a whole lot either. It would usually be like a soup and then maybe like a protein on the side. But it was also very simple. And I think when people think of French people, they think of like these decadent meals that you would have at a restaurant. The French only pull out the decadence when people are coming. So you really only have the decadence if like there's a holiday coming up or you're having a party at the house. Like, and that's when you'll have, like, the 10-course meal and the cheese plate and the dessert plate and all the things. But we didn't have that in the day-to-day life.
Gotcha.
So I think it's the concept of saving up so that you can put your best foot forward at the end. So, yeah.
That putting your best forward theme kind of coming
it comes back
Yeah, so coming back to a little bit maybe to your story, going to French public high school, did you do that all through middle school and high school? Or
Right, so I was in the French public school system all through high school, so until 12th grade. My high school experience was a little bit abnormal, I would say, for a French person. My school was what we'd call in America a magnet school, and so they had multilingual options. And my parents really wanted me to have an English background, at least a little bit, so that I had the option to go to the U.S. for college if I wanted to. So they put me into a bilingual high school program that would be British and French combined. So I took 2 courses, basically swapped out 2 courses. So instead of doing French Lit, I did British Lit. And then instead of doing French history and geography, I did it from a British perspective in English.
Okay. Yeah.
So it definitely gave me another cultural background to take into perspective.
Yeah.
And it also kind of built up my American culture a little bit because a lot of the kids that were in those British classes were British.
Right.
And I was not.
Yeah.
I was the American in the group. And
Gotcha.
so I got singled out quite a bit, and, you know, I had to defend myself at some point. And that pride comes in. Like, every culture has their pride.
Yeah.
And when you put a bunch of high schoolers in a room that are all from different cultures, it comes out a little bit more.
Gotcha. That cultural pride and identity.
That identity.
And so how did you kind of deal with that? I mean, I know, again, this is a loaded question with, you know, cultural identity, but I mean, growing up with American parents and then in French and then going to this school where there were, you know, British kids and kids from all over. How did you kind of deal with that strong sense of cultural identity? And
there were a lot of clashes, for sure. And you don't really process a whole bunch in the moment. But as you go on, you think, oh, wow, like, I had this opportunity of being in a room full of people from different places in the world.
Yeah.
And none of us really knew what we were talking about when it came to cultural identity, I would say.
Yeah.
We were just speaking from our own personal experiences, and I think that goes towards, like, the immaturity of the age.
Yeah.
But I experienced it as a very, like, well, I am who I am, take it or leave it. And then I kind of, like, you know, brushed off the rest. And it just kind of rolled off my shoulder. But a lot of other people were not taking that as an answer. So
From you? From
me. So...
Okay.
You know, you don't make friends for everybody.
Gotcha.
So,
so did kids not like that idea that you're just kind of like, I'm me outside of?
Right. I detached myself from the country that I was representing. So
gotcha. And what country did they feel like you were representing?
They thought I was representing America.
Gotcha.
And not to go political on you, it was during the first Trump election.
Okay.
So
gotcha. Yep.
I had to detach myself just a smidge.
Yep.
Otherwise,
fair enough.
It would have gotten a little chaotic.
Gotcha. And so people really wanted you to identify you as the American, and you kind of had to. Gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Thanks for sharing that. Mm-hmm. And Michelle. Michelle has a question. Is there something you wanted to ask?
I don't know, this is sort of going back to the very beginning, but you mentioned, like, you consider any place that you lived over 2 years home. Does that mean, like, you have multiple homes in your mind? Because a lot of people, they try and narrow it down to one thing, one place. So would you say you have, like, a multiple? Yeah.
Yes, I would. Yeah. I can't seem to, like, leave one behind. I can't differentiate that as much. For me, like, every city that I left a major part of my childhood in was home. Marseille is still home. I go back and I feel like an outsider, but I think it definitely is, like, still, like, a big piece of my childhood. And then going back to Toulouse, my parents are still living in Toulouse. And for me, like, that's home as well, because I left a big part of my high school years there, and my parents are still there. So yeah, definitely still home for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. Saying going back to Marseille was hard because I haven't been back to Azerbaijan in about 4 years, and Michelle hasn't been there yet, and we're going this December for New Year's. And so I'm a little nervous about going back for the first time and it not feeling like home. So I was wondering if could you talk a little bit about going back, and kind of what that was like and how long you spent away. And
I haven't been back to Marseille since let's see, it's been 2019. So 4 years, about the same.
Yeah.
And for me, like, the buildings, the places, the monuments were all the same, but the people that I had in those buildings, like, I had known in those buildings and places, they were all gone. Yeah. They'd all moved on. And so it's one of those moments where you're, like, thinking about it and you're seeing the places and you're reliving the memories in the moment, but then it's not the same. The people aren't
because
there.
The people aren't there.
The memories are there, but like you're all by yourself reliving the memories. Nobody else is there to relive them with you.
Gotcha.
So it's definitely nostalgic, but
Mm-hmm.
it's healing in a way, because
Mm.
you do get to process it alone, and in that moment it's helpful to like be able to process it.
No.
But that was my experience of going back to Marseille, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And it does feel like ages ago.
Yeah.
But like I still have pictures that I go back to and that I have hanging places, and I'm like, oh wow, like I remember that. It was a long time ago, but
yeah. No, thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about going through high school and just kind of that clash with cultural identity. And so then so how did you end up deciding about college and then coming back to the States for school, and then maybe a little bit about that transition from France to the US?
Right. Yeah. So a lot of people say coming back to the States, and for me it's moving to the States.
Yeah.
'Cause I never lived here. I never lived here.
Right.
So for me it was one of those moments where I was deciding to go back to my parents' roots.
Right.
To discover a little bit more about myself.
Yeah.
And figure out who I was and why I was that way.
Yeah.
I didn't mention this before, but like my mom is half Australian, half New Zealander.
Okay.
Was born in Canada and grew up on the Eastern Seaboard.
Wow.
So
okay.
my mom doesn't really have any roots per se in the U.S. But my dad, he was also a TCK. I mentioned that, but he was born in Nashville, but then lived in Korea for 8 or 9 years, and then moved back to the States.
Oh my gosh.
So my parents are a little bit disoriented in the same way that I am.
Sure.
So, but my dad is one of 6, and he has a bunch of siblings that have all put down roots in the U.S. And have all had kids, and their kids have had kids, and so it's been good for me to be in the U.S. and get to know all these cousins and like why am I the way I am, because so many of them are so similar to me, and it's really nice to be able to have people like you. Yeah,
just family
for sure. Family. And like I had siblings growing up, but I never had like extended family per se. So I had my parents' coworkers' kids. They were basically family, right. But they're not exactly like you. They're not your family. So, it's different. It's nice to be able to do that. Now you asked about the transition to the U.S. and how that was. How did I pick, first of all, to come to the U.S.? That concept of breaking the mold that I was talking about. The French were getting a little bit tired of me trying to break the mold. And so I wasn't doing very well in school. And so I was trying to look for a place that gave a little bit more room for individuality and approaching school from a different perspective and giving a little bit more space for different learning methods. And the U.S. was providing that opportunity. And so I started looking at schools there, and then I grew up with this Christian background. I wanted to learn about that from a more academic side, and so I chose Covenant College that way, and that's how I landed there. So
you landed there, and had you been to the U.S. previous to that?
So my parents, being missionaries, had to come back every few years for their furlough. Visiting churches and all that good stuff. Okay. So, that was my only experience of going to the U.S.
Yeah, so this is your first time here, long term. And what did you come to study at Covenant? And cool.
So I came to study elementary education.
Okay.
Purely off of my experience teaching Sunday school in a small church. I thought, man, I was actually pretty good at that, and then decided that education was the route. Of course, my first few years taking the introduction classes to the major really confirmed that calling for me. And I was able to get my degree in 2021. So that was really awesome. And it started my career off. So,
that's great. And so coming back to the States and just, again, kind of this cultural identity clash that you had in high school. And then you even just shared about your parents and just them having not really roots and not really knowing who they are, and then ended up in
Yep.
France and with you. Just how did your identity and cultural identity, how did that change or solidify, or how did that come to be when you came to the U.S. For college?
Yeah, so college is one of those times when you have a lot of small talk with people. You meet a lot of different people.
Yeah.
And the small talk is very intense, especially in the South.
Yeah.
Our Southern friends definitely know how to talk about the weather. And their first question is usually, where is home?
Yeah.
And as a college student, I had not processed at all what that definition was, what it meant to me. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that small talk ended in dead ends usually of, oh yeah, I grew up in France. And then people are like, what?
Yeah.
A lot of shocked expressions and people not knowing what to do with that. And I didn't know what to do with that. So it was really hard to make friends with Americans here because I didn't have any way of finding common ground. Yeah. There wasn't much there. But then I found a community at Covenant College that was international, and that's where I met Zachary. Okay. And Michelle was on my hall as well. And I met this international community that was just awesome, and they all had so many questions, and I was able to like find this common ground of like not knowing where home was or not knowing your extended family. Right. A lot of people in America think that's really strange. It is really strange, to be honest. But it's really nice to have people who understand that and have that commonality, and because then you can have a relationship and keep going from there. You don't have to linger in it if you don't want to. You can just keep going. Yeah. And the conversation flows naturally. Mm-hmm. But that was a process for sure. Finding that group of people that I was most comfortable with and being able to grow from there was a process. Yeah. I mean, it kind of answered my next question about how did you find community and create community, but really finding an identity in this community of international people, and just kind of this sense of home and just really finding that with them. For sure. Yeah. No, that's awesome. And Michelle has a question again, saving me.
Well, I was wondering if you could ask. I don't know if you're about to do it, but I would love if Marilyn just talked about the international schooling stuff. Like, I'm really excited to hear that. So with growing up, going to international school and then coming here and ending up in education. Yes. Tell us a little bit about education and what you're passionate about. Right. So, I went to college for elementary education, and when I finished out my process of going to college, I realized that my real passion was international students and international education in general. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an international school. Yeah. It just has to be an international context. And so that's how I ended up at the school that I'm currently teaching at. It's called the International Charter School of Atlanta. And it's a school that provides free linguistic immersion to students from anywhere in Georgia. Okay. And that really fostered that sense of the importance of linguistics in our society. And students who come from international contexts don't always understand how important their languages are to the world. Yeah. And a lot of them are also really confused because they think that they're weird or abnormal. But our world has become so much more interconnected and globally sound that linguistics is normal. Knowing multiple languages is the norm in every other country. America is the exception, I think, in the sense that most countries teach multiple languages and those people become multilingual very quickly. Yeah. I know the French teach 2 languages in middle school and high school. Yeah. Other than French. Yeah. So they have to start learning English in 6th grade. And they have to keep taking English until they graduate high school. Yeah.
Wow.
And then they also put in another language starting in 7th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to learn that language until they graduate high school.
Wow.
And so most people graduate knowing 3 languages fluently.
Wow.
And for me, that's crazy, because it gives this ability to go out in the world and interact with so many more people.
Yeah.
And so anyways, that brings me to like how I ended up where I am.
I actually had a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before you go into that.
Go
you
ahead.
mentioned linguistic immersion and
Yeah.
the school offering. Could you just real quickly, could you tell us what that is?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the school that I'm at does a 80-20 up from like, so 80% in English, and then 80% in the language, and then 20% in English.
Okay.
Up from kindergarten until 2nd grade. And then they do 3rd grade until 8th grade, 50-50. So where they do 50% in English,
Yeah.
50% in the language. And our school offers 4 different languages.
Mm-hmm.
So it has French, Spanish, German, and Mandarin. And the students basically, well, not really the students, because they're 5 years old when they get to the school usually.
Yeah.
But the parents usually pick one language track that their student is going to stick with from kindergarten till 8th grade.
Yeah.
And when they graduate in 8th grade, they come out with a dual lingual certificate.
Okay.
It was really hard to come out with. Dual lingual certificate.
Yeah.
So these students are getting a free multilingual education.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No. And so now you were talking about how you ended up there.
Yeah. So when I started off at Covenant, I got to do a lot of internships, going from different schools around Chattanooga and getting to experience different ways of teaching. And so from like Christian schools to public systems to rural system, like public systems.
Yeah.
And what I realized was my passion was being able to interact with these students that think they're strange because they're in this system that is very monolingual and very like monocultural.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to be able to provide my insight from growing up to these students and being able to help them understand that they're not alone in the system. Yeah. And that they have something very valuable by having multiple cultures.
Yeah.
And so that's where how I ended up the way that I am.
Thank you. And I think that is really, that's really cool that you have that passion for these kids in the school system that just are finding it strange. And I would like if you could describe a little bit the American education system, and just kind of, you talked about being monolingual, monocultural, and then the French education system, and you kind of mentioned the molding culture. Yeah. So in the French education system, you talked about the molding culture.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit about that and kind of what you've seen here in the U.S. compared to that.
Yeah. So growing up, I had a very, very strict education system that wanted us to be a certain way. I think the reason why the French do this is because France is part of the European Union, and the European Union is the size of the U.S. if you think about it, and it's a bunch of different countries with a bunch of different cultures and languages.
Yeah.
And in order for the Union to function, all the countries need to make an effort to learn other languages, to be able to interact and travel and work together towards being a better system.
Yeah.
And the reality is, like, the Union does very much work like the states in the U.S., where it's all the countries are working together to improve each other.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the multilingual molding system, so to speak, came from in France. What I've experienced in the U.S. is very limited, I will say. But what I've noticed from the Chattanooga area is that it's very simple, so to speak. So the schools are more focused on the social economic development, which I agree is very important.
Yeah.
But they're more focused on that than they are focused on the side of helping these students become globally minded. So they're very small city. So they're trying to help the students be more city minded versus globally
Interesting.
minded.
Gotcha.
So-
Okay, yeah, you talked about that socioeconomic
Mm-hmm.
development. What do you mean by that? With
Yeah,
the education
so-
system.
A lot of the schools that I worked in were Title I. So
Yeah.
those are the schools that have more than 50% of their students are receiving economic help.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those students were struggling economically.
Yeah.
And so because of that, the school is trying to help the families become more economically stable,
Right.
which is very important.
Yeah.
But for me, what I see is that these students are not receiving the emotional development and the linguistic development to be able to go out into the world.
Yeah.
We're developing them more to become students that may end up just staying in the city that they grew up in,
Yeah.
instead of growing them up to become students that can go other places.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the U.S. thinks that way of, oh, they just need English to get by in the U.S.,
Yeah.
so why would they need to learn another language? Well, they do learn Spanish, I think, in high school, but it takes more than 2 or 3 years of one language to
Yeah.
become fluent enough to be able to use it in a job.
Yeah.
So what I've noticed is that these students are not thinking about going abroad. They're thinking about staying where they know home is. And so
Yeah.
from a person who grew up and left their country, their
Yeah.
home country, and moved elsewhere because of my linguistic ability,
Yeah.
I wish that the education system put more emphasis on language so that the students felt like they could go elsewhere.
Yeah. So for you in your life, you felt that like language and linguistics has been really empowering for you.
Absolutely.
And so you
Yeah.
have this desire for kids and this education system to let, for you, language is a symbol of kind of the ability to move,
To travel.
and to travel,
Yeah.
and to, yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
that's awesome. So you're talking about in the school that you're at now, these kids have this 80-20 program. And again, a very big question, and you can break it down, but yeah.
That's
Teaching a different language. For me growing up in Azerbaijan, the way I learned the language was I was just thrown in there, and then eventually after like a year and a half, I picked up some stuff and was able to make it work.
Absolutely.
And everyone learns different languages differently, but I mean, if you were to teach a different language, how would you kind of like to see this linguist or more language-focused education? How would you like to see that played out?
Right.
If in an ideal world, if you had all the money and all the time in the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
I definitely believe in the throw it in the pool and see if it swims type
Okay.
concept. I definitely believe in that.
Yeah.
Because that's how I grew up. I mean, my
Yeah.
mom put me in preschool at the age of 3.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't speak a word of French. And I was 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trying to communicate with this teacher and 25 other kids about, simple needs like going to the bathroom or being hungry or
Yeah.
wanting to take a nap and things like that. Like, I mean, I think that being thrown in definitely will help you learn faster
Yeah.
because of those basic needs.
Right.
From what I've noticed from the school that I'm at, this 80-20 system works.
Yeah.
The kids are receiving 2 languages, and usually the English language is the one that they speak at home, so it's their mother tongue. And then they're receiving this foreign language from their teacher, and that's going to become their foreign tongue, and it's going to help them develop faster and faster. And I don't teach kindergarten or any of the lower grades. I teach 4th grade. So
Yeah.
I don't even teach language, which I
Yeah.
think is really humorous too. But that's another
It's
story.
something that you're passionate about.
It is something I'm passionate about. And the reason why I see it working is like these kids are having to communicate basic needs to their teachers,
Yeah.
and they have to find the words because
Yeah.
the teacher won't break the language barrier. It's literally her job not to break the language.
Yeah.
And so they have to to find words one way or another, whether it's like changing an English word to make it sound slightly more Spanish or changing it to sound slightly more French. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's the actual word.
Right.
So the kids are learning.
Yeah.
And the teacher always like corrects them so that they have the right word afterwards. But after 8 years of being thrown in the pool, you're going to learn how to swim.
Right.
And so it's just really cool. And also, like, they're learning about pretty deep, like, knowledge. Like, the language teacher is actually supposed to be teaching social studies and science in the language. And so these kids are receiving, you know, lectures about the American Revolution in Mandarin. And they're learning, awesome. You know? They actually know what's going on because they're passionate about the information. Yeah. And they're passionate about the language. And so they actually grow that way. Yeah. It definitely is not a system that's made for every kid. And I will admit that not every kid is made to learn multiple languages. Yeah. And that's okay. Yeah. If a student has learning difficulties, a learning disability of any sort, it's going to make learning a language 10 times harder. Right. Because they're already struggling to learn in that mother tongue. Yeah. And so I definitely agree that, like, it's not made for everyone, but money shouldn't be the barrier. Yeah. And that's what I appreciate so much about our school is that it's a state chartered school. So it's paid for by the state, and anybody that can get to the school on time can be part of the school. Yeah. And I think that's awesome. Yeah. So I've definitely learned to grow and learn from the school that I'm at. And I've definitely had a dream to, like, start my own school eventually one day. Okay. It seems very far away because I'm only 23. Yeah. Actually 24, sorry. But it does seem like a faraway dream. But if I had all the money and all the time, right. I would probably go back to France and start a multilingual English-French immersion school. Yeah. With other languages involved as well. And I think that would be really cool to have that opportunity. I'd probably make it from a Christian perspective as well. Yeah. I don't currently have strong opinions about Christian education. Yeah. That's fine. I used to, but I don't anymore. I've evolved. Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I just love how you paint this picture of, like, language being a tool of freedom where people can really explore and it opens up doors. Yeah. Which I totally agree with that. And I was wondering, I mean, in your own life, I mean, you've talked about, you know, knowing English allowed you to come back here for school, but is there any other ways in which you've seen language kind of open doors and give you this freedom that you talk about? So the freedom I've experienced it myself as a grown up, you know, as soon as I got my own money, I started traveling as much as I could. Yeah. And it's helped me understand that I can cross cultures and I can cross, you know, I can understand other people thanks to knowing their language and being able to communicate with them has helped me. So I've traveled extensively. The past 3 summers, I've gone to Europe. I've traveled across 9 different countries there in a summer. The pros and advantages of being a teacher, I will say, are that you get so many months off every summer. And so I've enjoyed going to other cultures and getting to know them. Yeah. I've also gotten a chance to travel the west coast of the U.S. And get to experience a different part of the world to what I've known. I've only known the eastern seaboard of the U.S., so traveling the west coast was definitely eye-opening and getting to know that there are other cultures as well. The south of the U.S. is so, I should say the southwest of the U.S. is so ingrained with Hispanic culture that it was very, very cool to see how immersed the Southwest has become. Yeah. I will also say, like, I keep going back to my traveling in Europe because, crossing so many borders, like, I don't speak German or Austrian. Right. And I had a wonderful time in Austria.
Yeah.
But that was not because of my English. It was actually because of my French.
Yeah.
Came across a lot of people who spoke French.
That's awesome.
I also traveled to the Dominican Republic recently
Mm-hmm.
and came across like a small village full of French people. And it was really strange, but it was also really cool to like
That's awesome.
get to know all these expatriates that have grown to love a different country and have stayed there over their home place in France. And it just goes to show that like you don't have to stay where you are.
Yeah.
If you're not content with it, like there's so much more out there to go see and explore. And maybe you'll find your joy somewhere else.
Yeah.
Maybe it won't be in a language you know. Go learn that language.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, I love the way that you talk about language. And I mean, I think, you know, from my own experience with speaking a language that is native to some people, and I don't know if it's similar in France, but if you as a foreigner speak this language that's native to someone else, it opens so many more doors, and people feel welcome, and there is something special about someone that, you know, you may not expect to speak your native tongue, and then them being able to do that, and it's almost like a picture of love and acceptance towards them, of like, you know, I care. Yeah. And this language, you know, it's a bond that's created, and I just think that's really awesome.
Yeah, I have a funny illustration for that, actually.
Yeah.
So Marseille is a port city.
Okay. And
one of my favorite pastimes in middle school was to go to the port and sit and enjoy a cup of coffee while people watching.
Yeah.
Love doing that.
Yeah.
It's so fun because the port is actually a very touristy place.
Okay.
And it happened to be the year where Marseille had won like the best city in Europe or something like that. And a very cheesy type of thing. But we had a lot of tourists that year.
Okay.
So I'm sitting at the port and I'm watching these tourists like walk around, and you know who the tourists are. Like, you know, they're the ones that are speaking the loudest. They're the ones that are holding the maps upside down. They're the ones that are, you know, asking 5 bajillion people questions about where to go, what to do.
Yep.
And I happened to see this couple go up to a French person, and they asked him in English, you know, do you happen to know where the cathedral is? And the lady goes, "Pfft," and walks away, right?
Oh my gosh.
And you're like, okay, hopefully they find someone.
Yeah.
And then you see a different like couple walk up to a different person, and in the most broken French possible, they ask her, you know, do you happen to know where the cathedral is? And this lady laughs at them so hard. She laughs, and then she stops, and then she switches to English and answers them in perfect English where it is.
Wow.
And it's just like, it's one of those moments where you realize if you just put a little bit of effort in, just a little bit, it'll become like an open door to be able to communicate with people. Like, you don't even have to like speak the language very well.
Right.
Just putting in a little bit of effort makes the other person want to put in effort.
Yeah.
And it's that exchange of time and effort that helps them become, you know, a communication situation, like where they can actually talk and have a conversation. And it just shows the willingness to try. Yeah. And I mean, it's the same, like, when I was traveling in Austria, like, you know, you learn, you know, the basic words. Right. Hello, goodbye, thank you, where are the bathrooms?
Yep,
you know?
The basic words.
The basic words. And, you know, if you go into a bakery and you just try and say hello, like, they're going to identify you as a foreigner and put in the effort to help you. But if you go in and you say hello, it's like in your most like Southern accent possible, or a different accent that you might have, like, they're not gonna try. They're gonna get upset. They might even like huff at you and walk away, you know? And it's just that effort that opens up conversations and opportunities.
No. Yeah. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Well, Mary Ellen, I want to say thanks for being on the podcast and sharing some of your experiences.
Happy to.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would like to say as a final word, or to anyone to close us out?
If you have the opportunity to travel, do it.
Do it.
Pick anywhere in the world if that's what it takes. Just do it. It's worth it 100 times over.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode with Mary Ellen. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation about France, education, and the United States. If you want to support this podcast, please go follow it on Instagram and Facebook. Share it with your friends and family. That would be greatly appreciated. Just as a reminder, episodes are released at the end of every month. That being said, I do have some pretty fun stuff planned for the next couple months, so be sure to tune in for that. Hope everyone is staying safe and warm during these winter months. And I'll see you guys next time on the Worn Shoes Podcast.